Alrighty, welcome back to the Defying Gravity podcast with Zach Goodman. Um, Today we're going to talk about building a conjugate program for a high school athlete. Okay. This is something that I'm asked a lot about is how I set up each day, specifically because we don't use any max effort or dynamic effort days, how I'm making a conjugate based program for high school athletes. Okay. So let's just get right into it. So the first thing I have down is to pick a split. Okay. Um, Upper lower is going to be preferred. That's what my athletes use. We do an upper lower 4 days a week. So upper twice a week, lower twice a week. We train upper on Mondays, lower on Tuesdays, Wednesdays off, Thursdays and upper, Fridays a lower. Okay. And so that's kind of how our split lays out. You can do a full body split if you want. Some of my athletes that have to do combo lifts, I'll do a podcast specifically about combo lifts. But my athletes that have to do combo lifts, it looks like full body. Okay. And so you can do that inside of a day. If you want to do that twice a week, you can do 2 combo lifts a week if you wanted to. I probably wouldn't do 3 combo lifts in a week. You could, but I probably wouldn't. I wouldn't do it, especially with a stronger athlete. If they're young, if they're middle school or just their training age is relatively low, you can do a combo lift with both. But I personally prefer upper lower, and that's what I keep all my athletes on. Or you can split your training split based on lifts. So if you want to have a press day, some sort of bench day, say you want to have an overhead press day, you want to have a deadlift and a squat day, it's going to pretty much be upper lower, but you can base it based on a lift instead. But again, as you'll see with conjugate, we're rotating things. So I don't really like to split my stuff based on a specific lift. I like to split it based on upper and lower. But it's all relatively the same at the end of the day. Okay, so firstly, we're going to pick a split, and that split's going to be dependent on a few things. Firstly, what the training schedule looks like for the athlete. So, how often can they train? Can they train 4 days a week? Can they train 2 days a week? Um, that's going to kind of determine what type of split you want. Other things like constraints, if you work on a school, like how often do you have access? What days can you train? So, are you going to be able to train them in a 5 day a week schedule, or do you only get the weight room Tuesdays and Thursdays or Monday, Wednesday, Friday, because you got to work around different schedules and things like that. Okay. So those are going to be things to think about when you are picking your own split. Okay. But once you have a split chosen for your athlete, second thing is you have to arrange the methods of tension. So we have these methods of tension. We have the 3 methods of maximum muscular tension. Okay. We have max effort, we have dynamic effort, and repetition effort. Okay, and we have some sub methods, most namely the brief maximal tension method. That's kind of a hybrid, kind of in between dynamic effort and also max effort. It's kind of like the in between method that we use for my athletes personally. Okay, but generally here we want to try to use the methods of these 3 methods of muscular tension as often as we can. The younger the athlete, the more often they need to be exposed to them. So if you're working with a middle school or a high school athlete, they're probably going to be better served getting each method of tension every single training session. So if you see them 4 days a week, like my athletes do, they see every method of tension every day. Okay, the older and stronger they get, so training age is gonna far outweigh biological age. So if you have an athlete that is in high school still, but they've been training for a super long time, this may look different. But for most of us, we're going to get athletes. The first time they come in the door is going to be somewhere between maybe 6th grade at the youngest, 7th, 8th grade, usually freshman year. A lot of the athletes are going to start coming to the weight room at the high school level. So the younger their training age, the more often they want to be exposed to these methods of muscular tension. Okay. Second thing with arranging the methods, okay, there's a specific way that we want to arrange these. We want to start for example, if we're going to have a session for an athlete and they're going to get every method of muscular tension within that session, we're going to want to start them with dynamic effort. That's going to be the first method they get in a day. Okay. And so dynamic effort is the first thing that they're going to do. So something fast. Okay. We're going to want to start with a higher velocity movement. Okay. It's going to potentiate the next sequence of movements. But aside from that, if you're jumping or if you're sprinting or something like that, okay, those are generally going to be things that you test. Aside from that, they're just very not demanding in the sense that your kids will be able to recover from them rather than starting with a heavy squat and then having them go sprint. I would rather see them sprint or jump first and then go squat, but that's a personal preference. Next, where to add jumps and sprints. Started to mention that jump, sprint, throw first. Okay, so the first thing your athletes should do is jump, sprint, and throw. Again, sprinting especially is going to be it's going to be very affected by your compound lifts. Okay. So if I squat them, then we're going to run the laser, they're going to run slow. Okay. Jumping is less kind of affected by fatigue just because it's a slower movement. So the higher velocity of movement, the more affected it is by fatigue. So sprinting is the fastest thing we can do. Jumping is kind of in that middle. It's that bridge. I always say it's the bridge between the lifting and the sprinting is the jumping. Jumping is slower than like a max velocity sprint. Okay, jumping is namely going to train acceleration. So you could squat first and then go jump. Okay, but you're probably going to have better jump outcomes if you jump first. Okay, that's just what I've seen. I've done both. I'd prefer my athletes to jump first and then go squat. But I have athletes that, again, with constraints of athletes, like not enough racks, not enough space. I have some athletes that squat first and then go jump. I just prefer, if you're trying to break a record, to be fresh. Okay. I also think it creates a little bit more predictability if you come in every single day and you're fresh, rather than having another variable get in the way of your jumps or sprints, things like that. Okay. Other thing, jumping at the end. We often will jump at the end of a workout. So maybe we dumbbell jump in first and then we plyo swing at the end. Or maybe we start with pogo jumps and, we do some sort of broad jump at the end. Okay. So we usually start with something fast and we end with something fast. You don't have to do that. It's not like that every time. But what I've seen with the lower body training, I like to jump them in the front end and then jump them in the back end. Okay. That's just what I like to do. So example layout. So here's the layout that my athletes use. This is exactly what I use for a layout. I don't really love templates, because I think templates get in the way, like, okay, bench, and then let's do a tricep, a lat. Like, there's templates that are great for learning, but I think ultimately I think ultimately you're gonna have to figure out your own thing. I don't think you can just follow a template that's given online. I think it's going to be individual. Okay. And then different constraints are obviously going to change what types of sequences you can have within your training session. But here's my layout. So we always start with a jump, sprint, or throw. Okay. The jumps are going to be weighted. Okay. The jumps are generally going to be weighted unless we're doing something like unweighted verticals or we're doing pogos or something like that. They're going to be weighted. So dumbbell jumps, plyo swings, things like that. Okay. Throws, like medicine ball throws. And then sprint, not technically dynamic effort, but would fit as far as high velocity goes. Okay. So we're always going to start with something fast. Okay. It's going to be the first thing that we do. After that, this is an ideal session. Okay, this would be an ideal session for an athlete. Start with that jump, sprint, or throw in that first little category. After they get done with whatever jump, sprint, or throw they have, they're going to go to the brief maximal tension lift. Okay, we do brief maximal tension 4 days a week. So all we do is brief maximal tension for the main lift. We don't do dynamic effort. We don't do speed squats. We don't do speed pulls. We really don't do those. Sometimes in the supplemental lift we will, but for the main lift, the main focus, that big lift, we're not going to use speed work for. Okay, we're using brief maximal tension. So we'll go our brief maximal tension main compound lift. Okay. After our main brief maximal tension lift, we're going to have our supplemental compound lift. Okay. So we started with jumps and throws. That's our first tier. Okay. It's that first exercise we're doing. Second exercise is going to be that BMT lift, that brief maximal tension lift. Okay. Your third lift after that brief maximal tension. So say we brief maximal tension bench. Okay. We're going to pick a supplemental compound lift. So this is going to be a variation of what we just did. Okay, so for us, if we just flat benched, okay, with brief maximal tension, we might incline bench. Okay, so that would be that supplemental compound lift. Okay, that would be that third exercise they do in that session. Okay, after the sprint, jump, or throw is done, after the brief maximal tension lift is done, after that supplemental is done, we move on to our accessories. Okay, accessories to me are going to be single joint exercises. They're going to be things that are lower stress. Okay, they're going to be things with less absolute load. Okay, that's to me what's going to constitute an accessory lift. Okay, and after that, we're going to have 3 accessory lifts. Okay, generally. Sometimes it's more, but for the most part, it's going to be 3. So that means that we are going to have a total of 6 exercises in a session on average. It's sometimes less, sometimes more. On average, it's going to be about 6 exercises a session. Okay, so again, first, jump, sprint, throw. Second, brief maximal tension lift. Third, supplemental compound lift to build off what we just did, that brief maximal tension, and then 3 accessories. Okay, these accessories are going to do a few different things for us. Okay, firstly, the accessory are going to build muscle mass. We're going to try to develop tissue. We're going to try to build muscle mass on athletes. Okay, generally, we're going to try to build muscle mass in areas that are weak. Okay, so for example, on a lower body day, hamstrings, low back, glutes, okay, quads, okay, those are gonna be areas that we'd want to build. Can also be again like calves and ankles and feet, those types of things we also want to build. So those accessories are going to kind of build tissue, not only build muscle mass, tissue tolerance. So firstly, muscle mass. Okay. Second thing those accessories are going to be used for, aside from building weak links and building muscle mass, is fitness level. Okay. So we want to be able to build that general base of physical fitness. Okay. So we need to be in shape enough to get stronger. Okay. We need to be in shape enough to recover from a session and compensate for the next session. Okay. So we want to be able to build fitness with those accessories as well. Okay. So those are kind of the uses as far as accessory movements: build muscle mass, build fitness, and then also prehab. Okay. We want to keep the tissue healthy. We want to keep athletes healthy. So we're going to prehab. Okay. And we'll talk about kind of what that means comparatively to other exercises, what that soft tissue development looks like, and what prehab kind of looks like for my athletes. Okay. Rep ranges and how to use these. Okay. Oh, brief maximal tension. Okay. Something I should talk about for rep ranges. Brief maximal tension is going to be a deviation of the big three. Okay. Doesn't have to be, but again, for the upper body, we're going to do some sort of bench. Okay. And at the end of this, I'll give you guys my exercise library for the upper body since we're kind of using that for an example. But we're going to use some sort of bench. Okay. That's going to be that exercise for the upper body. Okay. And then supplemental lift is going to build that brief maximal tension. Okay. Because that brief maximal tension lift, that big main compound lift, that's kind of our meter for how strong we're getting, right? That's our tester. That's our lift that we're really trying to build and drive using these methods. Okay. So rep ranges, accessories. Okay. 6 to 20 reps. That's generally where accessories are going to fall. Okay. It's going to look more like bodybuilding-ish training. Okay. We're going to use that 6 to 20 rep range generally. What I prefer for accessories, depending on what it is, I personally prefer to do something between 6 to 8 reps. Okay. I know the literature is coming out now that lower rep ranges elicit the same hypertrophy benefits, but with less muscular damage, less fatigue. So you may actually be able to recover better from lower rep ranges compared to the high rep ranges. Something that, again, like, I'm not someone that's just only looking at the literature. I'm looking at trying to be practical about things like, does this actually feel right? Does exercise feel right for doing 6 to 8 reps, or is it better for higher reps? Okay. People that train for a long period of time kind of figure what exercise they like for lower reps and what exercise they like for higher reps. Generally 6 to 8 reps is ideal. Sometimes we go 10s, it depends. We use 15s, we use 20s. Okay. Anything between that 6 and 20 rep range, sometimes 5s. It kind of depends. Okay. Supplemental lifts, these are always going to be 2 to 6 reps. Okay. Generally, the way that we're going to waive supplemental lifts, we're generally going to keep those in sub-maximal rep ranges and intensity ranges, right? We're not necessarily always pushing those supplemental lifts to absolute failure, but we are trying to progress them. So again, like an incline bench will be something that we're going to do sets of 2 to 6 for. Okay. Again, generally we try to stay in that 4 to 6, and sometimes we dip down in that triple or double if we're going to start progressing those a little bit heavier. But for the most part, it's that 4 to 6 range, but I put on here 2 to 6. Okay. Brief maximal tension, 3 to 6 reps. Okay. That's what we use. Really brief maximal tension is between 3 to 5 reps. But 3 to 6 reps is kind of where we stay around. We mess with some doubles. We mess with some 6s. A lot of our training is 3s, 4s, and 5s, but we mess with 2s and 6s. Okay. What I would say is like 75, 80% of our training is between that 3 to 5 rep range. And then the other, 10% or whatever, 25, 20%, whatever you want to put, maybe 10% for 2s, 10% for 6s, or if you want to say just in general, 20, 25% is we're using 6s or doubles. Okay. Jumps and throws, we're always going to use 1s to 5s. Okay. So for example, if we're jumping on a mat or broad jumping or something like that, we're doing maximal jumps. So we're not going to do 3 jumps in a row. We're going to do a max effort jump, look at the number, rest, do it again. Okay. Plyo swing. I mess around the plyo swing a little bit different. I like to use the plyo swing. Again, it's a dynamic effort movement. So I like to use it for doubles, triples, and 5s. I like to weigh the plyo swing specifically kind of in fashion with some of Westside Barbell's like speed squat waves. Okay. But the percentages are much lower. So like the actual like load percentage is much lower to be more in line with what you actually should be jumping with. Okay. And when I do an episode on jumping, I'll tell you, I'll share that information and go through how I program the plyo swing. But for all intents and purposes, it's just once 1 to 5 reps for the jumps and the throws. Okay. Sprints, it's always going to be 3 to 5 sets of one. I've never deviated from that. I've never wanted more. I've never done less. It's always been 3 to 5. Okay. We don't do tons of warming up. Okay. We just kind of run. We use jumps before we run. So if we are going to sprint, sometimes we give them dumbbell jumps. The dumbbell jump, come down and sprint. I've seen some pretty positive effects from jumping first before you sprint. But for me, again, it's always like 3 to 5 sets of one because all of our sprints are going to be max effort because we're timing. Okay. So that's kind of rep range wise. That should hopefully cover all the questions as far as rep ranges go. Other thing on accessories, I have messed around with maxing out different single joint exercises. I know it's like untraditional, but we do that a decent amount with certain exercises, especially supplemental lifts. We will max out some of those as well. I think I posted a video of us maxing out chin ups. Like that's to me an accessory lift. We max them. Again, we've maxed out some other accessories, but again, like nothing's really off the table. It's whatever our athletes need and whatever I think we need to get better, as well as experimentation and seeing kind of what works best. And then next thing I have is 3-week waves. Okay. 3-week waves is kind of the periodization scheme, if you want to say, right? So I program and train everybody in 3-week waves. So it's a pendulum wave. Okay. So basically goes up and comes down and goes up and comes down. Okay. In a 3-week fashion. So we're not programming things out, 12 weeks in advance, 16 weeks, 20 weeks. It's every 3 weeks. I program after 3 weeks, new training, right? And so that's kind of how our organization looks as far as progression goes, is that we're going to go in 3-week waves. Generally, this is going to look like a progression in intensity across 3 weeks and a regression in volume. Okay, so intensity is going to rise, volume is going to go down in those 3 weeks. Okay. Aside from low stress movements, so I have this little caveat in my notes for you guys is that, again, like brief maximal tension, okay, other accessories, supplemental lifts into that are going to progress in that fashion of intensity raising and volume decreasing in that 3 weeks. So our first week is going to be the lowest intensity with the highest, or the lowest intensity, but the highest amount of volume. Week 2 is kind of in the middle, and the final week is going to be the highest intensity we touch, but it's going to be the lowest volumes. Okay. So we progress in that fashion across 3 weeks. When I talk about low stress movements, I'm talking about things that are easy to recover from. So like banded hamstring curls, suspended hypers, things like that, banded rows, banded push downs. Okay. Things that I look at as kind of prehab and soft tissue kind of development in a way. Those things are going to progress in volume. Okay. You can add more band tension, you can add, things like that. But with what I've seen, I prefer to increase those in volume over the course of 3 weeks. And then the next wave, we start back with, a certain set. Okay. So with low stress movements, I prefer to progress with volume. Higher stress movements, I prefer to progress those in intensity. Okay. So that's kind of how our 3-week waves look. Next thing, exercise library for brief maximal tension. Okay. This is just a list of things that I just wrote down, just things that we've done. But this is not the only things that we do, but these are just some things I wrote down that we do pretty often. Okay, so for the lower body, some things that we do for our brief maximal tension lift. We do a regular barbell squat. We do box squats. We do safety bar squats, safety bar box squats. We do front squats, front box squats first bands, regular squats first bands. Okay. For the upper body, we bench, close grip bench, we pause bench, we close grip pause bench. Okay, those would be like things that we really drive as far as brief maximal tension goes. Our bench training is more limited than our squat training. We do a lot less variation as far as the bench goes, just because there's a lot less you can do, unless you have specialty bench bars like football bars and things like that. We don't have enough football bars for everybody, so again, you adapt based on what you have. But again, we have safety squat bars and things like that, so we're able to do a little bit more as far as the lower body goes. Okay. Again, those would be like our core main lift. Okay. Something to know on Fridays before our athletes go to the weekend. That's our last lower day of the week. We will squat and deadlift on Fridays. Okay. So we squat Tuesdays, Fridays come around, we squat and deadlift. And generally, like deadlifts are going to be programmed either three ways. They're going to be programmed for repetition effort. Okay. And so I have a few exercises that I like and prefer for repetition effort. But they're going to be repetition effort. They're going to be brief maximal tension. Okay. Well, they're going to be dynamic effort. I do like speed pulls. Okay. And our speed pulls are heavier per se than other recommendations out there. They're a little bit heavier, but again, they're not in that brief maximal tension range. They're just under brief maximal tension range. Okay. So those are things that I prefer as far as deadlifting goes. Okay. And deadlift wise, again, that's more of a supplemental lift. It's not the main thing I'm trying to drive, but it's something that we do because I see value in it. And we do a lot of different things. We do RDLs, deficits, sumos, stiff legs. We do a lot of different RDL or a lot of different deadlift variations. Okay. And so those are things that we kind of do as far as our training program goes. Okay. But when you look at designing a training program for a high school athlete, again, it's all going to be dependent on their schedule. It's going to be dependent on what you have access to. Okay. It's going to be dependent on their actual training age and their training level. Okay. These things are going to take precedent over anything else. Okay. But hopefully you got some sort of insight into kind of how I set up a conjugate program for a high school athlete. Okay. I try to make it relatively simple and straightforward. Again, if you guys have questions about things or I didn't explain something well, to let me know. Okay. And I'll try to cover it for you, whether it's through a DM or a voice note or whatever. Okay. Hopefully you got kind of a list of how you can kind of start training your own high school athletes. Okay. And we'll start to dive into each of these different things. So we'll talk about splits, talk about brief maximal tension. I know it's something a lot of people want to hear about. But again, this is kind of like a general overview. So if you were looking at getting your athletes into conjugate training, or you're looking at if if you're a parent, you wanted to train your athlete in a conjugate style system, this is kind of the way that I would lay it out. Okay. But again, this is not the only way you could lay it out. There's a lot of different things out there. But this is what I prefer. This is what I've seen the most success with. Okay. Again, if you guys have any questions, shoot me a DM on Twitter, Instagram. I'm pretty active on both of those. Okay. If not, thank you so much for listening. I hope this helps. Okay. See you.